So when we're voting, I'll go through a roll call here. So I'm going to do a roll call here just to see who's on the line here. Board Member Belknap.
Yes.
Board Member Bolter.
Yes.
Board Member Cannon.
Here.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. Yep. Sorry. Board Member Davis.
Yes.
Board Member Earl.
Yes.
Board Member Gravitt.
Yes.
Board Member Hanson.
Yes.
Board Member Haynes.
Yes.
Mark Huntsman's here. Board Member Lear.
Yes.
Board Member Marsh.
Yes.
Board Member Nielsen was calling in. Are you on? We'll watch for that one. Board Member Newell.
Yes.
Board Member Thorpe.
Here.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to go. Thank you all for being able to make this State Board of Education meeting. It's out of sequence from our normal meetings, but we said we'll try to meet every couple weeks to take care of board business and make sure we do our part to help with all the good things that are happening out in public education and that we can take care of business. So I appreciate you adjusting your schedule for this meeting. I want to welcome USBE staff and thank them for the support that they've been in preparing for this board meeting. Also want to welcome the public that's viewing on YouTube. Hopefully everything will work well there. We do have an agenda. We have quite a few things to take care of this day. I appreciate your patience as we go through this. Board members and those that are presenting, we know what the words that we can and can't say, or what the words that we cannot say for the YouTube feed, or we'll lose it. So I appreciate the communications right before this to remind of this. Sarah Young is our presenter, and thank you for taking that position there and making sure that the right stuff gets up on our screens here. So with that, we will get started. And then as you raise your hand, Chair Brittany, on this system, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins will watch for that. I'll try to watch for it, but she'll make sure she gets my attention. And then if you're not on, just make sure we just silence yourself, even though I think it can happen there with Brittany. So we'll get started. Our first course of action is under number 2, the Capstone Academy appeal. And we've asked our AAG, Brian Quisenberry, to just give us a quick update of why that's on the agenda. I'll turn the time over to you, Brian.
All right, you bet. Thank you, Chair Huntsman and board. Good afternoon from sunny South Utah County. The Capstone matter, you might recall, started with the State Charter School Board had made a decision to cancel Capstone's charter. And then, according to rule, the appeal came up here to the board. At our last board meeting, the appeal came to a panel of board members with a hearing officer, which took evidence for about a day and looked at exhibits and came up with a report recommending approval or affirmation of the State Charter School Board's decision. That recommendation came to this board at our last meeting, and due to a question regarding a factual issue, this board decided to send it back to the panel, where the panel then met and considered the evidence that was before the panel and the audio that was recorded of the panel's earlier hearing. And the panel then issued an addendum to its report. And I believe the board has both the original panel report and also the addendum. The addendum reviews the factual question and still affirms the State Charter School Board's decision to cancel the Capstone Charter. So the issue now before you is you'll receive that recommendation, and then you need to deliberate on whether you're going to affirm the recommendation as well as the Charter School Board's decision, or whether you reject the recommendation and the State Charter School Board's decision and send back to the State Charter School. So that hopefully frames the issue for the board. And one last little item, I just want to caution board members on considering any kind of evidence or information that's outside of the panel's report or panel's addendum or just outside of the evidence and testimony that was considered by the panel. As the board has is in its quasi-judicial capacity right now as kind of an appellate board, so to speak, it should be somewhat focused and limited on the record, the evidence that's in the record. That being said, Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. And just a reminder to the board that's within your packets and that there's a panel, review panel. There's 8 panel findings and 3 panel conclusions, and then also again is the addendum. And well, thank you for that. What's before us today is still what's recommended from the review panel, and the motion. I'm seeking a motion. This will be a motion before the board, but I'm seeking a motion that the board accept the recommendations of the hearing panel and uphold the State Charter School Board's decision to terminate the charter of Capstone Classical Academy effective at the end of the 2019 and 2020 school year. I'm seeking a motion.
Chairman?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Board Member Marsh.
Yes, I would make a motion to accept the recommendation of the hearing. Hold the State Charter Board Classical Academy effective at the end of 2019-20 school year.
Is there a second?
This is Board Member Newell. I second.
Okay, Board Member Newell is second. Discussion to that motion. Seeing none, the motion before the board is the board accept the recommendations of the hearing panel and uphold the State Charter School Board's decision to terminate the charter of Capstone Classical Academy effective at the end of the 2019-2020 school year. I'll do a roll call vote so I can count the votes. We'll start with Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Bolter.
Aye.
Board Member Cannon.
Aye.
Chair Cummins. Board Member Davis.
Aye.
Board Member Earl.
Aye.
Board Member Babbitt.
Aye.
Board Member Hanson.
Aye.
Board Member Haynes.
Aye.
Mark Huntsman and I. Board Member Lear.
Aye.
Board Member Marsh.
Aye.
Board Member Scott Nielsen, are you on? Okay, I will watch for some texts or anything to see if he's having difficulty. Board Member Newell.
Aye.
Board Member Thorpe.
Aye.
The voting was unanimous. The motion carries forward. Thank you, board members and Brian for that. Next, we'll have the superintendent's report. Superintendent Dixon, are you ready for that?
I am. I'm kind of in a dark corner. I apologize. So I would like to talk briefly, just give an update of kind of the lay of the land and how our schools are responding to our soft closure. I want to talk about the continuation of education. So really thinking about 3 phases. We've been dealing with it this way and thinking about it in terms of the urgent and immediate priorities. So that's feeding students, making sure that academics are in place, and that can happen through packets or online, however that's occurring at the local level. So feeding, academic care, social emotional well-being, trying to make sure that people are getting paid, and and I'm missing one all of a sudden, but we're trying to take care of those needs. So being focused on those issues, then the things that come up as we're talking to various stakeholders, of course, it's the loss of rituals and what about graduation and what will that look like? Talking about attendance, how should we be taking attendance? Can we provide pass-fail in lieu of grades? And then finance, and Scott's been doing an amazing job of sending out a lot of financial information, and we not only appreciate that, but we get a lot of really positive feedback, good positive feedback about it. So the other big chunk that we have been talking to people about, and you've also seen those communications, and that's in the form of assessment. Just wondering about, since all of the assessments have been suspended, what does that look like then moving into next year? And so we're talking about how we might use some of our summative tools in a formative way to determine where the gaps in instruction are. We're also looking at digital proctoring right now, and then also just calls for different ways to look at assessment. So again, those three phases, that's kind of our immediate needs and things we're talking about, but then it gets into the summer bridge and looking at federal dollars that might be coming our way, or continuation of funds that we have that can be carried over. So again, Katie Jones has been really good in helping us with all of that, but we're just kind of starting that space of thinking about what we might need. And then last but not least, as we return to school and kind of return and recover, how will things be different? What will we need to think about? So there are a lot of unknowns, but we can start to plan along the way. Some states have been very specific in their guidance and, writing 80-page documents and things that are very helpful to those states, but we still believe in local control. And so we're working on guidance that can be helpful. In order to do that, a survey was sent out. Sarah Young compiled that and put that out into the field. And then Jill Curry and others on our staff have been working together to help us understand what's in the survey. So we took a look at that this morning. And that's one form of data that we'll have compiled and be working on for recommendations in our board meeting on the 16th and 17th. We're also calling superintendents and charter directors. Each of the superintendency takes a few each week. And so we're trying to reach out and just ask them how things are going and get back some great data. And I can just gratefully report that things are going well for the most part everywhere. And there are little bumps and hurdles here and there that people are working on. But I just am overwhelmed by how great our teachers and our administrators and support staff are doing. We're feeding kids. There's continuation of learning going on. Most of it is digital, but some they're doing packets, and so we're moving along. I think I'll leave it at that. I think I would just add, along with the waivers that we got from the federal government, preliminarily, the governor will get some money, maybe about $29 million that he can use K-12. We'll probably get somewhere around $67 million. And then higher ed gets actually a little bit larger portion because they're looking at some loan forgiveness. There are more details to come. Deputy Jones and I were talking about it this morning. We're hopeful that we'll have more by our next board meeting and maybe talk about some formulas and how that can be used. And we'll want you to weigh in on some of those policy decisions. Those will be your calls as a board. So again, just we're in that immediate phase, but we're talking about and working on return and recovery, and that includes summer bridge. So we really welcome your input and any feedback that you have. When we come back to you next month, we're going to spend some very specific time on some policy calls and needed direction and guidance for the field. So I'll just give you that little precursor right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any questions? Looking forward to our next meeting when we start getting more and more into the weeds.
Hanson has a hand up.
Okay, one more time, Brittany. Somebody had their hand?
Board Member Hanson.
Okay, Board Member Hanson.
you. Just a question for the superintendent. I wondered if we could get copies of that survey and the results so that we can maybe preview that before our meeting next week.
Yes, we were hoping to give you that full report at our next board meeting. We just got the preliminary results, and we think we'll still have a few more come in. So we'll get it to you before the board meeting so that you're not giving it cold. Probably by end of next week, I think.
Thank you.
Am I good to move on, Brittany?
Board Member Earl,
Remember Earl?
Yes, I'm just wondering if you want our feedback or we have additional questions on that funding, you would like us to direct that to Scott Jones, or who would you like that directed to?
I don't think we're ready to talk about the funding yet because we only have preliminary numbers and we're waiting for more guidance from the federal government. I think in terms of feedback, I was thinking more if you're hearing things from your schools or you have things that we should be considering as we look at what we're doing immediately, what kind of guidance is needed summer as we think about summer and move into the fall. If you've got some things we can add to that dialogue so that when we come to you, we've got a pretty good sense of what we need to do in terms of policy.
Okay, so then I have a clarifying question. So the monies that are being sent to the state from the federal government are open-ended funding. They're not going to a specific area?
They're meant to help us with the current situation. So it would be most likely I had the opportunity to talk to Secretary DeVos last week and ask her about some of these issues. And they really want as much local control as possible. But the intention is to help bridge anything that occurred during the course of the situation or academic support, et cetera. So I think if Deputy Jones is on the call, he might be able to add to that.
Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, can you weigh in?
Yes, this is Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. It's early. These are preliminary numbers to the superintendent's point. One, criteria is that the money go for school year 19 through 20 expenditures related to or expenditures or costs that were a result of the situation with the virus. So we're going to have to, get some bottom-up feedback from the LEAs on what the impacts have been cost-wise to their operations, both academically and logistically and support-wise. Then compile that information and then come back through or to you, as the superintendent articulated, to apply that funding to those costs that were incurred as a result of the pandemic and its effect on Utah public education. Those details will become more clear to everyone in the days ahead. And that's the process that we're going to take with our LEAs. Does that help?
That adds some clarification. So it would be losses that have occurred due to the 2019-2020 school year. It's not necessarily needs that would be associated with this during the upcoming school year. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. Although, and I think the superintendent did speak a little bit about this, the 2019-2020 school year, and this is my terminology, it could extend, so to speak, into the summer, right? Depending on what actions or processes that, programmatically we need to take, in the days ahead, or associated, that funding could continue to support 19 through 20 or school year 19 through 20 academic and or programmatic processes that were able to be realized because of the situation or the impacts of the virus, i.e. soft closure, social distancing, things like that. So even though we would be in the next fiscal year on July 1st, there are programs or continuations at your direction that occur, right, then conceivably, and I can't commit to that yet because we don't absolutely know yet specifically what programs would need to continue into the summer or if at all, but that funding could be used after July 1st, again, we'd be in the next fiscal year because it was related to having to extend or advance that program into the summer at your direction or at, the direction of, in the allowable use of that funding for that purpose. I hope that makes sense.
So if I can give a concrete example, Board Member Earl, it might be something like some assessment, for example, that might occur in the fall, or some bridge courses or way to work with CTE. So there are a number of things that that could be a part of the current cohort, the 1920 cohort, that they would need to make up during the fall. And then Board Member Lear in the chat room asked if it's a grant or a loan, and if will we have to pay it back? And no, it'll come out almost like a Title I formula, as Secretary DeVos explained it to me. Right now, they're looking at just a block grant to go out to states, and I think they're going to give us some parameters, but not be super specific. But that will not have to be paid back to the federal government.
And so if I could, can I be heard, Brittany? Yeah. Okay. If I could just weigh on this a little bit, I think it was the superintendent that said that a lot of how and what will happen with this money, right, will most likely come before us as a result of those that are in the trenches. The LEAs are going to say, oh, we have these needs. And so all of that will be, those wants and needs will be gathered together and kind of bring up to the board in a kind of a unified way. And Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, I don't know how he maintains it, but is in almost daily communication with BAs and then business administrators and also superintendents on what's happening on the funding side. So I think by our next board meeting, we might have better direction, and it might even be a little bit after that, as this is being played out. Is Scott muted?
You described that very well, sir. Thank you.
So it's in motion, but it's not absolute. And then it's about priorities too that will be pushed up and collected, because we are about local control, and we want to hear from that. But we'll be weighing in after they provide us that opportunity to act. So we need to be listening to them too. But we're just probably a couple weeks out at least from seeing what that might look like. Is there any other? We ready to move to our next item? Okay. Next is on our agenda under 4. We'll turn the time over to Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings, and this is the part where one of the main reasons that we're coming for this meeting here is to address waivers from board rule, and then also the next step is statutory changes. But we're on the board rule piece, so we'll turn the time over to Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings.
Good morning, or actually good afternoon, board members. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. The first item, as Chair Henson just stated, is we're going to talk about motion to waive board rules. You can see on here there's approximately 5 or 6 rules to be amended. They are almost all exclusively licensing rules and are related to some of the nuances of students not being able to participate and obtain the required hours, or others who are trying to move from one license to another license or area of endorsement, not being able to finalize their clinical experience requirements. So first, though, we'll talk about number 1. I'll just give you a quick background, is an exemption to our employee evaluation requirements in board rules R277, 531, and 533. We've had requests from our LEAs to waive those requirements. They have required observations, and then also there are other elements that make it difficult for them to comply with this year. And numbers 2 through 6 are all waiving requirements in those various rules related to hour requirements, called clock hour requirements, or in some cases specific experiences. And in one case, it's about a grade requirement of a C or higher. Some of our higher ed institutions are moving some of their courses from an ABCD type grading system to pass-fail. So this would allow the higher ed institutions to maintain their pass-fail grading system and it not impact those who are seeking the different endorsements or trying to get their license, their educator license. And then the last one at the bottom, you'll see number 7, talks about extending the deadline for educators to renew their license.
Did we lose something? Brittany?
me now?
Yes.
I apologize. So I was on number 7. Is that where I was when you stopped being able to hear me?
So in the board, yeah, when you get down to 7 in my packet, it listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then went to 8. But I believe.
So, and Sarah, could you move to the actual draft language of the motion now? If you look on Civic Clerk on this item, you'll see a draft motion there. And there are currently, on the version that I accessed through Civic Clerk, there are 7.
Yeah. And so mine on my, that I printed off Civic Clerk, on my printing, it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then jumped to a number 8. So there is 7 included. So that would just, so people, if they're, well, let's see what this shows right here. Does it go to scroll down? Yeah. Okay. Well, mine I just printed an hour or so ago, showed it as an 8. So I just don't want somebody to be thinking something was off. So thank you.
Great. So that's the summary of the board rule request for this meeting. You can see the draft motion there if somebody would like to.
So I want to say something really quick before, if somebody wants to make this very wordy. And so before a motion is made and seconded, and then we get into it, it would be really good if anyone has any questions. Let's just ask now. But when this motion is read, that first paragraph would be proper to maybe say CO, skip a few letters and numbers, and then PAN and skip a few, because we don't want to be saying certain things that will bump us off the YouTube feed. Would that be acceptable? Vice Chair Breen comments, is you okay with that?
Yes, we have 2 hands raised for questions. Board Member Earl, and then Belknap.
Who was the first one?
Earl?
Board Member Earl?
Yes, my question is specifically with number 3, the teacher candidates waiving receiving a SEER better. Is there some way that instead of waiving that we could just include that they can receive a passing grade if we're making exceptions for this time period? Just because I'm not comfortable, I feel like higher institutions should be working with students at this point. We shouldn't just say, well, we don't need to worry about the standard of what you're receiving, but maybe we include something about it, not necessarily removing the C waiver, but that they may receive a passing grade for the class. I'm not sure how to word that, but that's, I have concerns that we're waiving that idea of having a acceptable grade. So.
Angie, we're not hearing you.
Sorry, I was just going to start typing something here. Just as background, if it makes, and I see I'm making, if it makes you feel any better or differently, I just wanted to mention that I don't believe in our current, the rules that will be replacing this, that we actually require or say anything about grades that are provided. It's more about the higher ed institution determining what they have determined the courses are and what their grading system is. But what about if at the end of number 3, we put as long as the student receives at least a passing grade in the course or the applicable course? Does that work?
I'm good with that. I feel like there just needs to be something there.
Okay. All right. Board Member Belknap.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, and one is on number 1, where we're waiving for employee evaluations. Does that also include that they will not have to turn in a report up to the state that they can use internally in their own districts?
Right now, the way that language is written, it would exempt them from all of the requirements of those 2 rules. And so I'm assuming the requirement to report is in those rules. However, you'll see in a moment in the next topic that we'll be discussing about statutory requests, there are requirements in statute that, and reporting might be one of those that would need to be amended or dealt with in code and through legislation. So I guess the question is your question, are you wanting LEAs to provide us that data or not?
I honestly, it's probably one of the least important things for them to give us a report on their teacher evaluation. But when they already have those evals and they can use them internally for that. So
Okay, did you have another question, Board Member Belknap?
I did, but it's not for now. Sorry.
Okay.
Board Member Hanson.
Okay, Board Member Hanson.
Thank you. So first question with regard to number 3, I agree with what Board Member Earl raised that we should open it up to just be a passing grade. But I'd like to limit that, and I believe in the background information that we received, it was limited to spring of 2020. I don't think we should be giving a license for D grades that date back to last year or something to be acceptable. This should just be for grades that are affected by the current crisis.
Okay. Is there any other, Brittany?
One more.
Oh, yep. Okay, sorry.
And I don't know, Chair, if there's a way to word this just generally, but I believe these waivers should be limited to the current situation and things that are affected by the things that have been going on recently, and not blanket waivers if there's a way to word things in that way.
Board Member Hanson, this is Angie Stallings. Can you see how I just changed that? Is that going to work for you? I don't know if you can see.
Yes, I believe that matches the language you had in the other document that was attached. And yeah, that looks, I just prefer to make these waivers as restrictive as possible and not open things up to things that maybe weren't affected by recent events. So that's good by me.
Board Member Lear is next.
Okay, Board Member Lear.
Okay, I want to make sure these waivers seem to be a blend of board rule, mostly board rule, but I don't know how many statutes are affected. I didn't check that. Are we in ongoing communication with the legislature that if some of these are statutory or required by statute, that there'll be an equal sympathy or concern at the legislative level?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Let me answer that. This is MG again. Yes, so the next item on the agenda, I believe, is a report on our request for statutory changes and the work we're doing with the legislature. And so right now, this motion only deals with board rules, but there will be a separate motion coming up related to our work with the legislature. And I can report, and I know Superintendent Dixon could also report separately if she'd like, that we are, and same with Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, we are in communication with legislators and their staff members about the needs of the system and what some of those waivers or amendments will be. And they seem to be very open and ready and willing to work on legislation during the upcoming session.
So let me just give some more background real quick as we're diving into this. As we inventory certain concerns that we have in our board rules, staff is inventorying those, working through them, and presenting them to the board. And that's why we're having these meetings every other week. And if it's an emergency or if there's something we need to do in a rule that to help best take care of our LEAs, we'll do it more often than that. We're also, you'll see continually on our agendas, besides waivers from board rule, you'll also see requests for statutory changes. So we're inventorying those also, but we can't change that, but we know what we can ask the legislature to do. And the Senate President and Speaker of the House and staff have been, they're very much aware of our situation, are very open to a lot of communication, and pretty much we will we have going on in public education will be on their agenda in the next, as they're bringing this next legislative session forward. So this isn't our last shot at it, and we're going to continue to work at it because there's a lot of rules and a lot of things we're trying to turn over while we're trying to, or review, while we're also at the same time trying to support public education in the state during this. So, and we can certainly come back and amend certain things too as we're moving forward. But just for background, this isn't our last opportunity. Other questions?
Board Member Mike.
Board Member Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. This may not be a concern, but I wanted to ask anyway, and this is related to question number 5 or item number 5, where I know that many of our schools are utilizing third-party agencies to provide these services, and I don't know if there are any requirements for those third-party agencies, and if this would relate to them at all. Can you clarify that?
So that's a great question, Board Member Haynes. And I guess the question I would have is, are you concerned about the institutions or the groups that are training our psychologists, school social workers, and counselors, et cetera, and whether or not they are ensuring that students meet those minimum clock hour requirements, or are you instead wondering about requirements related to funding we send to LEAs to support school social workers, psychologists, et cetera?
Originally, the second part of that, but now you bring that up, I think both could be a concern. Can you address both those?
Sure. So this specific motion right now are all about licensing requirements or requirements for educators or other individuals who are seeking a license from the State Board of Education. Meaning, so if somebody, say you have a teacher who now wants to become a school psychologist or a school social worker, our rule that's in place now, 506, has specific minimum clock hour requirements. So it might be that they have to spend 400 hours, spending time with another school social worker as they're working with students. So this specifically is just about those who are seeking a license. We're trying to meet that. The question you have, though, is, although it's not handled here, I know that we as staff, we can actually take your question, and then by next board meeting, if there's something that is, if there's a problem related to one of our programs, like I'm thinking morning of last year's 2019 HB 373, that's a program that provided funding for our LEAs to hire social workers. I will work with staff to see if there is an issue there, and then we could bring that back at our next week meeting.
Great, thank you, Angie.
Vice Chair, any comments? Do we have any other questions?
Board Member Earl.
Board Member Earl.
Yeah, my question has to do, and I think it falls under number 7. Those that aren't able to get fingerprinting right now, that would fall under that category, right? For their new. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So.
Can I speak to the student teacher part? 7?
Yeah.
I know that Jennifer Johnson has been meeting with the deans. I've heard from the School of Social Work. Board Member Cindy Davis may want to weigh in as well, but it sounds like everybody is able to be close to finishing their hours for student teaching. With those I've spoken with, it's been just maybe a week short of their total hours. So it's not like they're just starting into or complete a bit of it. For those that this would apply to, they're just a few hours short. That seems to be the case with social workers, student teachers, etc.
Board Member Davis would like to speak.
Okay, Board Member Davis. Board Member Davis.
Just to add in what was said before, I think that I can speak at least for Utah Valley University where I work. We were mostly finished with our student teachers. They were a week shy of finishing in the classrooms but most of their goals and reports and things had been worked on and accomplished and documented. The field time that was required to be cut short on our end were for our juniors and first semester seniors that went out into classrooms after our student teachers finished to get additional field experiences. But I think that those can be made up next year or in other ways, and they should still get a complete experience of student teaching in the fall, at least for our university. And I'm guessing many universities are in the same situation.
Yeah, there are a few hands up. Just check your hand if you still want to speak. Board Member Lear.
Board Member Lear.
No more. Okay.
Board Member Hanson.
Board Member Hanson, do you have additional question? If you can hear us, remember.
Member Hanson.
Okay, no hands. Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings, is this You've made some edits here. If we can scroll to the top,
Yes.
this is a little bit out of, a motion and a second and a bunch of discussion. We've kind of got our discussion ahead of time. So without exception, what I would seek is a motion, and this is a very long wordy motion. So board members, please pay attention to it. I don't believe if we get this motion read and I accept the motion as read, and we get a second, then I'll call for a roll call vote. Board Member Belknap.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion in light of the national and state declarations of state emergency due to the COVID-19, and in addition to the waivers approved by the board on March 19th, 2020, it is moved that the State Board of Education, would you want me to read all of it, Chair?
Yes, it's very important that it is read.
Thank you. Number one, grants to local education agencies a statewide waiver of the employee evaluation requirements of R277-531 and 533, including the requirement for an educator or administrator to have a certain number of observations or a summative rating for the 2019-20 school year. Number two, grants teachers, candidates a waiver of the minimum clock hour requirements for university students currently enrolled in a board-approved educator preparation license program in section R277-504-3. Number three, grants teacher candidates a waiver for receiving a C or better in all education-related courses and major required content courses for university students currently enrolled in a board-approved educator preparation licensure program and expecting to complete fieldwork or clinical experience requirements for courses or experiences between January 1st, 2020 and before June 30th, 2020, as in section R277-504-3, as long as the teacher candidate receives at least a passing grade in the applicable courses. Number four, grants to educational leadership candidates currently enrolled in a board-approved educational leadership preparation program and expecting to complete educational leadership requirements on or before June 30th, 2020, a waiver of minimum clock hour requirements for educational leaders as in section R277-505-5. Number five, grants to school psychologists, school social workers, school counselors, audiologists, speech language pathologists, and speech language technicians candidates a waiver of the minimum clock hour requirements in R277-506 for candidates completing applicable requirements between January 1st, 2020 and June 30th, 2020. Number six, grants for university students currently enrolled in a board-approved licensure program and expecting to complete fieldwork or clinical experience requirements on or before June 30th, 2020 in R277-506, and for number seven, for educators whose licenses are required to be renewed by June 30th, 2020, extends the June 30th deadline in section R277-500-4 to October 31st, 2020 to allow educators more time to renew their licenses.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I would second that, Chair Huntsman. Mark Marsh.
Okay. Board Member Marsh, the second. The motion before the board is the motion that was read and by Board Member Belknap and seconded by Board Member Marsh. So we're prepared to vote on that. Is that correct, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
Board Member Lear has her hand up.
Board Member Lear.
Sorry, I don't know why that keeps happening. No.
Okay. All right. I'm going to do a roll call vote. Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Bolter.
Aye.
Board Member Cannon.
Aye.
Board Member Cummins.
Aye.
Board Member Davis.
Aye.
Board Member Earl.
Aye.
Board Member Gravitt.
Aye.
Board Member Hanson.
Aye.
Board Member Haynes. Aye. Board Member Huntsman's an aye. Board Member Lear.
Aye.
Board Member Marsh.
Aye.
Member Scott Nielsen was able to get on the line. Looks like not. Board Member Newell.
Aye.
Member Thor.
Aye.
Voting was unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you for your work there, board members. Next, we'll have Deputy Superintendent Andy Stallings go over item 4.2, the request for statutory changes.
I apologize. I'm muted. I apologize.
Oh, you're fine.
So thank you, board members. This next item, there are two documents that we'll review related to our work with the legislature. The first document is titled Legislative Exemptions or Waivers Related to Suspension of Assessments. So I just wanted to give you an update that since the board made your motion last meeting to suspend the statewide assessment requirements for this year, the school year, we had legislative staff members who reached out to us and asked us which sections of code would need to be amended related to that motion. So I won't read all of the sections of code that are there, but if you look at the list, and it's not that document, Sarah, if you'll keep going, it's the next one with quite a long list. Yes, that one right there. You can see how many sections of code we currently have identified as needing to be amended. And the first couple there are the sections of code related to the actual assessments, and then the majority, if not all of them, from about five or six of them down all the way to the bottom, are requirements program, either reporting requirements or, for example, the turnaround requirement to designate schools as low performing. A lot of the external evaluations we have, as well as reporting on certain programs. We listed there all of the programs and evaluations that rely on or require us to measure student achievement based on those assessments in order to do the reports, evaluations, or the designation of schools for certain programs. And so this is just an update, an informational item to let you know that the legislature is likely going to be looking at amending many of these sections of code, or maybe a blanket waiver in one section of code related to reporting or evaluations. And so you can watch for that for the special session. So the second, and are there any questions on that before I move to the actual action item?
Questions regarding this part of this inventory?
Board Member Lear.
Board Member Lear.
I do have a question this time. Do we have any certainty if this is all of them? Are we going to keep looking? What's the sense of that?
If all of them are what? I apologize, I didn't hear the last part of your question.
Oh, I just said, is this all of them, or will we keep looking and just do them over time? I'm just kind of asking generally. I don't have a problem with that. I'm just wondering if we've tried to get every single section now, or if we're still going to be trying to find those.
Well, at this point, I know that legislative staff, our staff, we will continue to make sure that we've caught all of the reporting requirements, but that might be why the legislature might consider simply a blanket statement in code about reporting requirements related to student achievement, or that's reliant on the statewide assessment data. And so this is kind of, we wanted to give them a list of what we knew were sections of code, but they may choose, like I said, to do something much simpler and kind of a blanket waiver for this school year for reports that rely on those statewide assessments.
I would really appreciate, if I can follow up, I would appreciate that kind of a blanket waiver, so we don't get tripped up by something we overlooked or accidental, and it doesn't disadvantage someone.
And I can provide that feedback.
But to Board Member Lear's question, we're still, until that's there, doing our very best to put on this list an inventory any of those proposed waivers that have anything to do with assessment, along with everything else that we identify in our waiver process that we've got to have them. And so I imagine this list has potential to grow, but it isn't absolute. It's just where we're at today. Would that be a correct way to have that, Angie?
Yes, Chair.
So it's work in motion, and thank you for keeping a really tight ship on inventory on this list. These lists are going to continue to grow. There's no question. So please continue to the, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, is there any other questions on this list?
Board Member Hanson.
Board Member Hanson.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak in favor of advocating for a blanket kind of waiver on these. I think that as we open up, if we go and open up each of these sections of code and try to tweak them, there may be a tendency, I certainly have a tendency to go in and try and clean up other things that may be there that need to be cleaned up. And I think that would probably be unmanageable. So if we can talk them into a blanket, I think that's a lot better way for us to go right now.
Great. Okay. Any other questions before we move on, Vice Chair Brittany? Comments?
No other hands?
Okay. Angie, please continue.
Yes, great. Thank you. So this next item, we are hoping for an action or a motion. And this is the, Sarah, the motion that says motion request for statutory change related to. As you can see there, this motion would give us the ability as staff to work with the legislature and ledge staff to seek potential amendments in code that are as a result of the current situation we're in. You can see we have included some of those that we are working on right now with our staff as well as ledge staff to identify. We believe that there may be some desire to or need to amend budget deadlines for LEAs. You can see second, a lot of our funding distribution formulas for different funding of programs are rely on average daily membership calculations. What that means is it's essentially LEAs either use an attendance verification method or another continuing enrollment measurement to measure how many students they're serving. And because of this time we're in right now, that may be impacted. And so I know Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones is working with the fiscal staff of the legislature to determine if any of those formulas might need to be amended or altered. And next one that we've heard from some of our LEA stakeholders is that there may need to be some amendments to the notification and public hearing deadlines and requirements related to LEAs that impose property taxes. And then last, related to the motion, the board rule motion we made a moment ago, you can see that we are also looking at whether the educator evaluation requirements that are new in code may need to be amended for this school year only. And that's a summary of the motion before you.
So before we get into the motion, is there any questions or comments?
Member Lear?
Board Member Lear?
Yeah, I had a couple of related thoughts. One, I want to make sure that that list includes any deadlines related to board rules. And that's kind of a circular issue because I know we need some rules to go into effect, but I also want to make sure that the public has the opportunity to weigh in on that. And then related to your question or your statement, Angie, that you'd like permission from the board for staff to continue working on these issues, trying to let bygones be bygones. I support that, but I also feel like the board has to be kept up to date. I don't know if you do that in an annual. I feel sometimes I don't know if you do that in a regular correspondence about just informational, not a board discussion. But I don't want to give a blanket, not a waiver, but a blanket. I don't want to give a blanket approval for staff to work on things that I'm not familiar with, recognizing these are extraordinary times. So 2 concerns. Board rule deadlines and then the blanket, yes, staff can work on this kind of concern.
Great. I could answer the board rule deadline question if you'd like. And so just for your knowledge, the current requirement is that any rules that are required to be enacted as related to legislation, you have 180 days from the enactment date. So most bills take effect in May, kind of the early middle of May, which means that we usually have to have all of our board rules filed with the Office of Administrative Rules by about the middle of November. However, often because we have the 2-month lag, we get a lot of our rules done in the beginning of December. And then for those bills that take effect on July 1, which is also a common effective date, we would have until January 1 of the next year. I can recommend that also as a potential waiver that deadline be pushed back. The reality is a lot of our board rules, especially those related to funding of programs and distribution of funding, often we are in a rush to get those done ASAP after the session so that the rules can be determined and the application requirements or any requirements you all want as a result of those programs be in place before July 1. So although even if we were to push the deadline back, usually there's an urgency to get a lot of these rules in place before either July 1 or the beginning of the school year. But that is a great, that is something I'll add to the list, Board Member Lear. And as you can see, the current motion would allow us to continue to work with the legislature and identify issues like that. We could, if you would like, I can talk to Superintendent Dixon about this, provide maybe a weekly or some sort of an update about what we know with respect to our work with the legislature. In general, I also know that there are groups other than us who are reaching out to the legislature. You may have districts or charter school representatives who might reach out independently as well. So there are times when things make it into bills that aren't necessarily things that we push, but I'd be happy to, or sure, I'm sure Superintendent Dixon, jointly, one of us would be happy to provide updates on what's going on or how we're working with the legislature on a potential special session.
So one way that we can deal with this and make sure that the board's informed and everyone's informed as that emergency session is put together and right prior to it, we'll already have an inventory of ask, and that would be a great time to brief the board or share that. And then I wouldn't be surprised if we'll have a board meeting before that session happens. And we can address any concerns that board members may have as you're working through that. I think might be the best way to do this, because there is a lot of plates spinning right now in trying to inventory and keep track, but an update now and again, I guess that's up to you and the superintendent, but I'm pretty sure we'll have some kind of briefing, last minute opportunity as a board before that session happens.
And I think that's a great idea, Chair Huntsman. We could have a meeting before that special session. I'd be happy to help.
Okay.
Hanson?
Remember Hanson.
I'm sorry, hand was still up from before.
Okay.
Board Member Earl?
Remember Earl?
Yes, I'm wondering if you could give me some more information about number 3, the notification, public hearing deadlines, those kind of things. What exactly are we seeking there? I need more specifics on that one.
Sure. And Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones might be able to fill in on this a little more also, as I think he's the one who received the feedback and the request. But just in general, I know that and the dates I'm going to get are hopefully somewhat accurate. If an LEA wants to impose or increase a property tax, they have to set a budget by a date, and it's either June 22nd or July 22nd. And then they have to notify the public that they're going to increase that property tax. And usually those property tax hearings, public hearings, occur in early August. And so my guess is that people are simply wondering how long the requirement for there to be less than 10 or no more than 10 people together, and especially now where we're being asked to stay at home, where that might be difficult for them to have a public hearing for members of the public to comment on any increase in property taxes. And so I don't think there's, from our perspective, and I can't speak necessarily for Scott Jones or Superintendent Dixon, but I don't believe there's any concrete requirement or request that we are making right now. I think it's something that school districts are probably going to be working with the legislature on, and it may not even be something that's done in this first special session. I think if things go longer, you could possibly see a second special session where something like this would be handled. And it probably wouldn't be unique to just school districts. It would probably be something that cities, counties, other political subdivisions would be seeking at the same time. And of course, your county assessors and treasurers would be involved in that, as well as the tax commission. We just wanted you to be aware of something that we've heard from LEA stakeholders that they're considering or worried about, depending on the length of time that the situation we're in right now, continues. But there's nothing proactively from the state board staff that we will be asking for.
Okay, so this possibly, I guess from what I'm hearing, this possibly could include other methods for doing a public hearing besides meeting together, that kind of thing, possibly? Or I guess it's just up in the air. So it's not doing the property tax increase without public hearing. It's maybe the method for that or the deadlines associated with it, correct?
Probably it would probably be deadlines related to the notifications or for the public hearing. I can't imagine the legislature completely suspending any requirement for some sort of notification or public hearing before those taxes are increased.
Which would be hard based on the deadlines, meaning that how you set a budget when you don't have okay, that is interesting. Okay, I'll be following that. Thank you.
Okay, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, did you have did Angie cover that well enough, or did you have something else to add?
No, I don't really have anything else to add. It's just, not knowing what is going to happen. And we're just really making sure that we still maintain compliance but then also that we're, allowing our LEAs to adapt and, depending on the timing or what decisions are made regarding state fiscal year 21 appropriations and funds, they'll still meet the requirements, but they may need to meet them on a different timeline. And that's really all we're seeking is just that understanding, that flexibility. It doesn't mean that we're going to not comply and not submit budgets or make the tax certifications to, the public and involve the boards at the levels that we need that they're dictated by code and by board rule. We just are looking for some flexibility potentially in the dates, right? That's really, Angie articulated that well. So I have really nothing additional to add other than that.
Thank you, Scott. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, is there any other hands up on this particular issue?
Yes, Board Member Lear.
I'm sorry, Brittany, I didn't hear. Oh, Board Member Lear.
That was from before. Sorry.
Anything else? Anyone else, Brittany?
No.
Okay. So I appreciate all the discussion on this time. So again, we'll seek this motion, and my intent is whoever reads the motion and we get a second, and then we'll try to vote on it. Again, there's the COV word that's in there.
Board Member Belknap has her hand up.
Board Member Belknap.
I'd like to make a motion that due to the national and state declarations of state of emergency due to the COVID-19 PAN, it is moved that staff work with the legislature on potential amendments to the Utah Code to be addressed in a special session, including provisions related to the following. Number one, LEA budget deadlines in sections 53G-7-302 and 53G-7-303. Two funding distribution formula changes related to average daily membership or ADM calculations. Number three, notification and public hearing deadlines and requirements related to an LEA imposing property taxes. And number four, educator evaluation requirements.
I'll second.
Who was that second? Was that?
Board Member Thorpe.
Okay. So we have a motion that was read by Board Member Belknap and a second from Board Member Thorpe. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, are you seeing any hands up?
Board Member Belknap and Board Member Lear, are you trying to comment on this? Okay.
Yes, Carol.
Board Member Lear, yes.
I just want to make sure, Angie, you see that motion including any rulemaking deadlines, including opportunities for the public to comment on rules before they're made public. And I know we've talked about it several times, but I want to make sure that rule includes that. Would you say it does, Angie?
So the current motion, the way it would include that. I did send some language to Sarah that we could add a number 5 there if you would like us to do that before it passes.
I want to.
Hang on one sec, real quick. Oh, so we went through this. We went 1 through 4. So do we have a proposed amendment? Is that what we're wanting to do here? And it's coming up after the motion is read, correct? So now we're doing an amendment. Is there an amendment? Not. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins is Board Member Lear's mic. You have her turned on there, the mic.
Her mic is on.
Okay.
I would amend that I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but I just want to make sure that this list of areas where the board is working with the legislature includes the rule writing process and it specifically includes the public's ability to weigh in on it.
Okay. So Board Member Lear, would your amendment to the motion be to add number 5, deadlines for the board to file administrative rules as described in section 63G-3-301-14?
That sounds right. Yes.
Okay. So that would be your amendment.
Second.
We have a second. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Is there any Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
Board Member Lear, your hand is up. Did you want to speak to the motion?
I'm sorry, I'm easy to add it, but hard to take it down. No, that's great.
There isn't any, not seeing any, Brittany?
No other hands that I can see.
Okay, so the proposed amendment to the motion is to add a number 5, deadlines for the board to file administrative rules and described in section 63G-3-301-14. We're going to vote on the proposed amendment. This will be a roll call vote. We'll start with Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Bolter.
Aye.
Board Member Cannon.
Aye.
Board Member Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
Aye.
Board Member Davis.
Aye.
Member Earl.
Aye.
Board Member Gravitt.
Aye.
Board Member Hanson.
Aye.
Board Member Haynes.
Aye.
Board Member Huntsman, aye. Board Member Lear.
Aye.
Board Member Marsh.
Aye.
Board Member Nelson, able to join us? No. Board Member Newell.
Aye.
Board Member Thorpe.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes on the amendment. So the motion before the board is that the board approve the motion that would read, the amended motion that would read, and I'll read it one more time. And then we'll vote on it. The amended motion is due to the national and state declaration of state of emergency due to the COVID-19-19, and it is PAN in a few letters. It is moved that the staff work with the legislature on potential amendments to Utah Code to be addressed in a special session, including provisions related to the following. Number 1, LEA budget deadlines in section 53G-7-302 and 53G-7-303. Number 2, funding distribution formula changes related to the average daily membership ADM calculations. Number 3, notification and public hearing deadlines and required related to an LEA imposing property taxes. Number 4, educator evaluation requirements. And number 5, deadlines for the board to file administrative rules as described in section 53G-3-301 as amended. So we're going to vote. Are we ready to vote, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
Member Lear, is your hand still up from before?
Oh, there it went.
Sorry.
Okay, we're going to vote. Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Bolter.
Aye.
Board Member Cannon.
Aye.
Vice Chair Cummins.
Aye.
Board Member Davis.
Aye.
Board Member Earl.
Aye.
Board Member Gravitt,
Aye.
Board Member Hanson,
Aye.
Board Member Haynes,
Aye.
Mark Huntsman's and I, Board Member Lear,
Aye.
Board Member Marsh.
Aye.
Scott, you on? Board Member Newell.
Aye.
Board Member Thorpe.
Aye.
Amended motion passes. Thank you. We're moving right along. Next is number 5. Civics test requirements. Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman, are you ready to come on line to?
So good afternoon, Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Student Engagement. There have been some questions from the field regarding the board asking for a waiver from the statutory requirement of students needing to pass the civics test in order to graduate. 53E/5 requires a public school student who graduates to pass a basic civics test as a condition for receiving their high school diploma. A basic civics test means a test that includes 50 of the 100 questions on the civics test form used by the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. Students must answer a minimum of 35 out of the 50 questions correctly. So for clarification, in R277-404, a parent can exempt the student from taking the test, but this does not exempt the student from the graduation requirement, and the student may not graduate without successfully completing the requirement. So with those conditions in mind, I'll be providing some background for discussion. So first, the civics test is not granted in the assessment waiver that the board previously asked for because it doesn't meet the requirements of being on a state system. And there are many flexibilities that are already in place, including it can be printed off and doesn't need to be taken digitally. The responses can be mailed in. There's a sample test on UEN's website. The test can be taken as many times as needed in order for a student to pass it. There's no proxy that is needed, and there's not a secure proctoring requirement. There's no requirements that it needs. Students have had the opportunity to take this test since they were in 8th grade. So
We're breaking up quite a bit.
Other useful information to consider is that each LEA tracks this requirement on their own, and it is not up to USBE to track it. And the LEA the student is from has to verify that the student has taken the test. And since 2016, there has not been a single student who has not graduated due to the requirement. Now, with this background in mind, the board may still need to discuss providing a personalized opportunity for an LEA at this point in time to alter this requirement in case a senior student has not been given access to this test. So this concludes my background report on the civics test agenda item. Are there any questions?
Okay, questions from board members on the background? Board Member Lear.
Sorry, no, I don't know why that keeps happening. No. Thank you.
Board Member Thorpe.
Board Member Thorpe.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm just wondering if there is, can you talk to me more about the reasons why we wouldn't necessarily want to waive this for students? I'm hearing from constituents that are concerned about this and would like a waiver. So I'm just curious about why we would not want to do that.
There's been a lot of talk, especially in our last legislative session, about the importance of our students taking a civics exam and what that means to be civically engaged or civically minded. And so right now there isn't something that's in place to have that. Moving forward with our portrait of a graduate and different things, there'll be different ways to perhaps show different competency measures. But so far, this is what is in place for a measure for civics engagement or to pass some sort of a civics exam.
Board Member Thorpe, did you have a follow-up?
It's just in line with the other waivers for our state assessments. Is there something that makes this different than the reasons that we waived those others. I mean, I understand what you're saying, so I get that this is something that came up during the legislative session. I know there were several bills around it, so we want to honor that. But I'm just curious, when we were talking about legislative session, we weren't in this interesting time. So is there something specifically that makes this test one that shouldn't be waived, as opposed to the others that we have gone ahead and waived the requirements for?
I would say that this one is the only graduation requirement that is mentioned in statute specifically about taking a test. It did not fall under the definition of the statewide assessment test that we asked to be waived did fall under. So this one was kind of an anomaly as it stands on its own.
Chair, may I say something? Angie?
Yes, Angie.
And one other comment that I don't know if board members could see that Darren, Assistant Superintendent Nielsen is mentioning, that feedback from the LEAs that we've received is that this requirement can still be met virtually. And so unlike our statewide assessments that are done through a platform and are proctored and are often done at a certain time period with, the whole class, et cetera, this test is a little different. And LEAs feel like they can still meet, most of them can still meet the requirements or work with students who haven't yet finished that requirement through this distance learning or in a virtual setting.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, is there any other questions or comments before?
Board Member Belknap?
Board Member Belknap.
Yes, thank you. I move that staff work with the legislature to amend section 53E-4-205 to allow the board to grant a student waiver in mitigating circumstances where a senior or the senior's LEA has demonstrated the student's inability to access the basic civics test from the requirement in section 53E-4-205 for a student to pass a basic civics test before receiving a high school diploma.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
That was,
Board Member Newell.
thank you. We have a motion and a second discussion to the motion.
May I speak to my motion, Chair?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I really thought a lot about this, and it really, if there's so many ways for students to take this test, however, we're going to have some one-offs of kids who can't get into the building, who don't have access to internet, who don't have that ability to do this. And I think we need to provide this for those who are those one-offs and not necessarily the majority of students. So thank you.
Any other discussion to the motion? Vice Chair Cummings, is it
Yeah. Board Member Earl?
Earl?
I just want to make sure I understand this has to do with accessibility, the inability to access, not necessarily any other items, because it seems as if the pandemic really, has not affected, are we okay? Sorry. That has not really affected the ability to do this. And it seems like the door's wide open on the ability to complete the state requirement. So it's the accessibility that would LEA would be able to waive.
That is correct. Any other question?
Board Member Hanson?
Board Member Hanson?
Thank you. I'm going to speak against the motion. I think that our waivers should really be restricted to things that become impossible because of the current situation. I think this one's very possible, and I would hope that school counselors and others who are monitoring graduation requirements can help all our students have some sort of access to a civics test. So that would be my comment, and I'll be voting no.
Vice Chair Cummins, any other discussion?
Mark Marsh? That's him.
I'll also be voting no on this. I think this is something that is not as time appropriate as many of the others. They've had an opportunity for a number of years to complete this and can continue to take it. So I don't think it really blocks them other than just for this short period of time that we're having our issues.
Vice Chair Cummins, any other discussion?
Board Member Davis?
Board Member Davis?
Yes, I think for this year, this is probably something that we could look at because there may be individual students. I do worry a little bit because we've already communicated about the civics test specifically to LEA. So I don't want to undermine what we've already communicated to people, but But we may have an instance where this is a difficulty just for this year. So I'd like to amend the motion. I'd like to amend the motion to be specific to this current school year.
I would second that.
Okay, we have a, that would be the graduating class of 2020, specific to the graduating class of 2020. So who has control there? So are we going to put that in or list it? Yeah, see.
So, sorry, Sarah Young. Angie, if you can make that edit, I can refresh and show it.
It is. Okay.
Refresh one more time. I changed graduation to graduating.
Okay, so that proposed amendment would be to add that for students graduating between January 1, 2020 and June 30, 2020. Is that the intent? Would that meet the intent of the amendment, proposed amendment, the motion to amend maker? Cindy, does that meet?
Can I?
Is a second still good?
Yes.
I wonder, really, this is Jenny Earl. I think that
One sec, hang on.
okay, this has to do with the date, June.
Okay. Because some of this, you have a question on the date, but
Yeah.
okay, go ahead. What's your question?
Well, my question is this. I think youth graduating this year can finish requirements up until sometime into August and still graduate with their graduating class. So I just want to make sure we're I don't know exactly where that deadline is, if it's the end of August or if there's a deadline in August, but I think they have up until that time frame. They could still graduate but finish things. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Somebody's jumping on. Somebody just threw in there at the end of September, but Patty Norman says it's September 30th.
I just think we want to make sure we're using dates we use. Anyways, that's my comment.
Which is
Sarah, please refresh again.
okay. So Cindy, would this work for you? Because we're still learning of exactly when that school year is actually going to end. Okay, thumbs up there. Mark, are you good for the second?
Yes.
So without objection, well, let's just vote on the amendment. We can do it. Okay.
Request.
What's that?
I just need to request that, there's a lot of hands up and I can't tell if people are wanting to speak to this motion. Can everyone just check their hands? And
Okay, do we have hands up? Vice Chair Brittany Cummins on the amendment?
so Mark and Carol Lear, are you wanting to speak to this amendment?
Will you shake your heads if you want to speak to the amendment?
Okay,
Yes.
Mark raised hand. Okay, board member Lear says yes.
Yes, I'd like
Board
to.
Member Lear, speaking to the amendment. Board Member Lear.
Yes, I just want to make sure, because my constituents are in the situation where I'm speaking. My constituents are in a situation, many of them, who don't have access to computers, don't have access to sophisticated equipment that would allow them to necessarily take this test if it hasn't been offered to them in the past. So I want to make sure there's a way for that to be waived, and it would never. I was relieved to hear Patty say that it's never kept a student from graduating since 2016. But I especially want to make sure there's a waiver opportunity for any student who needs it, and it doesn't stand in the way of a high school diploma. And my second point is it's usually an LEA determined decision how long the LEA will let the student make changes or finish up credits before giving credit, because the LEA gives the diploma.
Okay. You were speaking for the full motion and not the amendment, I take it. Any other discussion to the proposed amendment?
Earl?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood. I believe this is not just a technology way. You just don't have to have a computer to take this. I think you can take this paper and pencil from what was indicated. I don't think it limits anyone in our state, Carol, so I don't think it would limit anyone in your area as well. Am I accurate in saying that?
That's correct. It can be paper and pencil.
Okay.
Shoot.
Vice Chair, I gotta reel this in. We're speaking to the amendment for students graduating between January 1st, 2020 and September 30th, 2020. That's what's on the table, is the amendment. The way my tracker, is that how you have it, Vice Chair Cummins? We're on the amendment. So discussion to the amendment.
Jenny's point, can I make a point?
Is it what you want to make a point? You want to have debate on the motion or on the amendment? Or Member Lear?
Never mind, I'm fine with the amendment. I want to say to Jenny's point, that.
Okay, go ahead.
So, I know students can take this on paper and I want to make sure you understand that, or we all understand that though they can take this on paper, there are also students who their homes don't have the communication capacity that other homes do. So it's not just taking the test, but it's knowing they have to take the test when their parents speak a different language, when they've recently moved to the school district, that they're in a more mobile situation, in a more extreme situation, especially with the current concerns than many students are. So I want to make it as leave the doors wide open and not prohibit any student from graduating just because of this test. And if we think this amendment does that, great. I think that the previous motion does it, great.
Is there any other discussion to the proposed amendment?
No other hands.
Okay, the proposed amendment is to add to the motion for students graduating between January 1st, 2020 and September 30th, 2020. We're going to vote on that. All in favor say, no, I'm not going to do that. Board Member Belknap, sorry.
Aye.
Board Member Bolter.
Aye.
This is to the amendment. Board Member Cannon.
Aye.
Vice Chair Cummins.
Aye.
Board Member Davis.
Aye.
Board Member Earl.
Aye.
Board Member Gravitt.
Aye.
Board Member Hanson.
Aye.
Board Member Haynes.
Aye.
Mark Huntsman's an aye. Board Member Lear.
Aye.
Board Member Marsh.
Aye.
I'm not going to call Scott. Board Member Nelson until we hear him on here, so I'll skip that. Board Member Newell.
Aye.
Board Member Thorpe.
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes unanimously on the amendment. So what's before the board is the amended motion that says that move that the staff work with the legislature to amend section 53E-4-205 to allow the board to grant a student a waiver in mitigating circumstances where the senior's LEA has demonstrated the student's inability to access the basic civic test from the requirement in section 53E-4-205 for a student to pass a basic civics test before receiving a high school diploma for students graduating between January 1, 2020 and September 30th, 2020. I'm ready to vote. Call for the vote. Is there any hands up? Vice Chair, comments of discussion? On the amendment motion? No?
Hanson?
Board Member Hanson.
Thanks. I just wanted to say to the board, not insensitive to some of these students who it may be difficult to get word to them, but I think that instead of having our counselors or other people who are checking the graduation requirements off, focus on getting a waiver. I think that's the amount of time and effort should be able to contact these students and make sure they're ability to take the test. So that's my thought.
Okay. Any other discussion? Vice Chair Cummins, say any hands?
Board Member Lear?
Okay. We're not hearing you. Okay, I'm going to call for a vote. Are you ready, Vice Chair Cummins, for that?
I think so. Board Member Lear, are you trying to speak? It's still up.
Board Member,
I'm sorry. I'm off. I'm done.
Just click your hand button one more time.
Vice Chair Cummins, is there anyone else?
No other hands.
Okay, let's vote on the amended motion. All in favor, or not all in favor, sorry, Board Member Belknap. Man, I've got a habit there. It's
Aye.
too long. Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Bolter.
No.
Board Member Tannon,
Aye.
Vice Chair Cummins, Board Member Davis,
Aye.
Board Member Earl,
No.
Board Member Gavitt,
Aye.
Board Member Hanson,
No.
Board Member Haynes. Aye. Mark Huntsman's an aye. Board Member Lear,
Aye.
Board Member Marsh,
Aye.
Board Member Newell,
Aye.
Board Member Thorpe,
Aye.
motion carries. Okay. Thank you, board members. There's a couple more items on our agenda, and also to the public and staff that's weighing in on this. We are to item 6, school turnaround exit status. Turn the time over to Assistant Superintendent Darren Nielsen.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. I'm happy to be part of your meeting today. So far as the board's been discussing waivers, it's been in the context of waivers that affect all 1,113 schools in our state and the community members for those schools. What we're going to talk about over the next few minutes, the turnaround, is actually proposed to affect just 7 schools. And so some of you may be wondering, why didn't we connect this board rule with the board rules that were discussed at the beginning of this meeting? I think that would be the reason. This is a lot more personalized. We're talking about just those 7 schools. Now, Sarah, I don't know if you'd let me share my content. I'd like to put up 4 slides that get it to go full screen. I want to acknowledge Max Lane and Leslie Evans. They're the experts for the board when it comes to turnaround, and they work individually with the schools that are identified for turnaround. They know the leadership in these schools personally, and many of the teachers in these schools. So we're talking about just cohorts 1 and cohort 2. Cohort 1 started in 2015, and there were 26 schools identified for state turnaround. Of those schools, there's only 2 that remain in the program, and you see those on the screen here now. They were granted an extension. They qualified for an extension at the end of their the time period with which they should have exited. And then at the end of this school year, with the data from this year, would have been another opportunity for them to be considered for exit. Obviously, with the waiver for administering state assessments and the challenges that brings into play, it puts us in a position, for these 2 schools in a position where they would, without discussion by the board, there would be, we would just treat this year as a whole constant, which is required under our federal waiver for our CSI schools and TSI schools, that schools would be held constant and continue to receive services. The reason we're before the board today is discussion about whether the board would like to grant flexibility to these 2 schools and then the 5 schools I'm going to talk about in just a minute. It's important to note that these schools with cohort 1, the criteria to get them out was they needed to improve 1 letter grade. The other consideration is that the accountability system that was in play when they qualified for turnaround is no longer the one that we use. We've modified the accountability system to include more variables and also to make it more growth oriented. And so the numbers you see on the screen would if we applied the 2018-19 data, so last year's data, to these 2 schools, please note that we're also saying we would apply the 2018-19 accountability rules, which were different than the rules that applied when they got into the program. You would see that San Juan, Whitehorse School down in San Juan County, actually was well above the bottom 3% on 1 year's worth of criteria using last year's data and using the accountability system that was not the same accountability system that got them into the program. So we have those 2 schools that may very well be interested, and I can speak for one of those specifically who's reached out to us and requested consideration on why they might believe they should be considered for exit. Then we get into our cohort 2 schools, and we have these 5 schools that were qualified in cohort 2, and they're in a position that had we proceeded with our assessment as scheduled at the end of this year and into the fall of next year, they would have been considered for exit. So questions again come from them as to whether there's flexibility that could be awarded by the board to them for consideration of exit. In the circle there, you'll see that the rule that in the motion that we talk about requires them to be above the bottom 3% for 2 consecutive years. The data that we're showing you again is just if we were looking at the 18-19 data only, instead of having a 2 consecutive years of qualifying or being out. That's information of how they would have scored based on last year's data only. Which brings us to another wordy potential motion, but something for the board to consider, and that is that the exit criteria for R277920, we're requesting the board consider and discuss the possibility of of waiving that for these two cohorts and putting into place another option for them to be able to demonstrate that they've made substantial improvement that there's a high likelihood they'd be able to maintain. So the state review panel, we'll talk more about that on the next slide, but it's already part of the rule. And what we're proposing is that there would be 3 criteria that the schools would be applied to. Did they achieve above the lowest 3% threshold using the previous year's data, which is easy. We've already looked at that. Can the school, in addition to that, can the school provide evidence of substantial progress and growth to data outside of the accountability system data? That might be local assessments they administer, or it could be other data that they collect. And number 3, does the school have qualitative or quantitative data from the implementation of its turnaround plan, working with their vendor to identify their greatest areas of focus, and then the monitoring that those vendors do with them? Is there evidence to show that they've made progress in those areas that they'd identified in their plans? Then at the end of that process, those recommendations would come back to the board, likely sometime in August or September, for the board to make a determination of whether they would exit either the extension that the first 2 schools had or exit from cohort 2 status. The review panel then, which is again included in our 27792 already, and we're not requesting that the board consider waiving that portion of this. It says 3 members who demonstrated experience, and in the rule it actually states at least 3 members, so the superintendent could select more than that. This is the criteria of the members of that committee that would be put in place should the board want to move forward with this recommendation. That concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it back over, including my screen, to you, Chair Huntsman.
Okay, thank you. Questions? And I really appreciate your work on this, and we're still in the education business throughout all of this. Questions? Any questions for Assistant Superintendent Nielsen from board members? Vice Chair Cummins, is there questions?
Board Member Davis?
So I heard Board Member Davis. Is that what I heard? Board Member Davis?
I was just going to make the motion and I'd like to speak to it if you're ready for that.
We certainly can go to that space. So yeah, I'll accept a motion.
Okay. I move, as a result of the suspension of the requirements to administer state assessments in 2019-2020, it is moved that the board waive the exit criteria requirements of R277-920 and approve that schools identified for turnaround status in cohort 1 that were granted an extension and schools identified in cohort 2 that are scheduled to be considered for exit at the conclusion of the school year use the following criteria and process to determine their status. The state review panel would review each school's data and make a recommendation to the board. The guiding questions in this review will be: 1, did the school achieve above the lowest 3% threshold using the 2018-2019 school accountability data measures? 2, can the school provide evidence of substantial progress and growth in addition to the data in the accountability system? And 3, does the school have qualitative and or quantitative data from the implementation of its school turnaround plan that also demonstrates substantial improvement?
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
That, Chair.
Board Member Marsh?
Yes.
Thank you. Discussion to the motion? Vice Chair Cummins, do you want to speak to the motion? Well, before we get into discussion, Board Member Davis? Speak to the motion.
Yeah, I'd like to start this motion. I called and asked some questions with Darren Nielsen earlier, and I appreciate the fact that this gives our schools some flexibility if they do want to continue to try to exit from the turnaround program. But I also appreciated that they don't have to apply to exit. If they, we've done a lot of talking about potentially needing or benefiting from additional supports for an extra year to get far past a threshold that's been defined. And if they feel that they need that extra support, they don't have to take this option of flexibility. So I think it's a nice balance.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Cummins, is there any?
Board Member Cannon, I think that's a question.
Board Member Cannon?
Thank you. I do have a question for Darren. On the documentation that you first gave us on the first slides, you have a 2018-2019 ranking of, I think for Redwood Elementary, it's 97%, which sounds really good. And then the next column says they're still in the bottom 3%. So tell me how to interpret that data you've given us, if you would, please.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you look to the right column that you called out, that Redwood's they're still in the bottom 3%. So for that school, under that criteria, using that data, they would still be in state turnaround classification. So the motion, we're looking for schools that are above the bottom 3% to be able to meet that first criteria. Did the school achieve above the lowest 3% threshold in the 18-19 accountability year? Is one of the three-prong areas that would need to be considered. Otherwise, they would be in a hold constant state and have an additional year to be able to move themselves up and out of that criteria.
Okay, tell me what the 97% meant, the column where you have the percentages.
So I'm interpreting that, and Max or Leslie can jump in because they helped create these slides, but it's just the opposite. So maybe the way that it's identified there is they're not in the 97th percentile, they're in the bottom 3 percentile.
May I ask a follow-up?
Please do.
Especially in the case of Redwood, they have already been given an extension, and I believe, Darren, you said with their inability to exit, they will just be given another year-long extension. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, if the board doesn't take any action in terms of giving the cohort 1, cohort 2 schools flexibility, there's no criteria to consider them for at the end of the school year, and so they would fall under what our federal waiver has, which is we would just hold them constant for an additional year until we have data to make determinations. They would continue to receive services.
Thank you.
Max has his hand raised.
We're board members, we're going to be losing, some of our people had other things they had to jump on at 3 o'clock, so we're going to lose part of our body. I think this is our last action item, so we can keep our questions or comments. We've got to take some action, or we need to recognize our time here. So who had a question or comment?
Board member Lear.
Yeah, a quick question for Darren. And this may be a silly one, but are most of these schools anxious to get out of turnaround? Because I don't want to upset a system that may be working, especially at such a volatile time. But are they anxious to get out?
So we've heard personally, or I've had personal communications with Paradigm High School leadership, and then in a third-party loop-in, I've been involved in communication with Dixie Montessori Academy. And then Max and Leslie, maybe in the text box, if you type in if you've had additional schools that have requested consideration of flexibility.
Okay, Vice Chair Brady Cummins, I'm afraid things are going to get turned off on us because we're hitting the 3 o'clock.
There's no other hands.
Okay, so the motion is as read and posted. We're going to vote on it before we lose our people here. Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Bolter.
Aye.
Board Member Cannon.
Aye.
Vice Chair Cummins.
Aye.
Board Member Davis.
Aye.
Member Earl.
Aye.
Board Member Gravitt.
Aye.
Board Member Hanson.
Aye.
Board Member Haynes.
Aye.
Board Kunzman's and I. Board Member Lear.
Aye.
Board Member Marsh.
Aye.
Board Member Newell.
Aye.
Board Member Thorpe.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. I apologize, board members. We're going to lose this opportunity. I'm surprised it's still going on because other people are grabbing onto something through the UTN and other things that maybe I better in the future try to have more buffer here or a little bit more time. So we're going to, on the information on school continuity of education plans, we'll put that off. I'll ask the superintendent to maybe work with Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, who's actually part of collecting this. There's a group on that to just, it's an information item to shoot us where we're at on those and where we're still going. And then my board chair. Yes.
It's actually Melissa, and it's Melissa that's collecting those. We have a specific website or an email set up for it. So it will come from myself or Melissa, an email on that.
Okay, so watch for that. And then I'll waive my report. We're really close to an adjournment. We'll make sure, I'll try to move the meeting a little quicker than the next round, or try to get us some more time. That's, I apologize for that. But the time that I do have before we lose it here, I think it's really important to recognize public education and what they are doing. It's from the local boards, the directors, the superintendents, the business administrators, the teachers, the classified employees. They are getting it done. As I constantly hear, and these are hero stories. These are heroes in public education that are making things happen. And as I listen and invite feedback from our education community, I'm not getting much of anything negative. All I am getting is how great my spouse is that's working all night and on weekends to make education happen, how great my teachers is, and this teacher and that teacher. And yes, it's hard. It's very difficult, but there are a lot of heroes out there. And so I just want to recognize them and say thank you. And those heroes aren't just limited to their USBE staff are working 24/7. As I'm getting district people and educators tell me that, hey, I got this on Sunday, I got this on Saturday, I am being heard, thank you. And so thank you at USBE staff. Also, so the superintendents that are all part of this and the leadership, and you can just pass that on. And thank you, board members, for your patience, and we will move through this. I welcome any individual comments or some of the requests as we're moving this forward. Our next board meeting's in 2 weeks. If something happens, we have to have an emergency one, we'll squeeze it in. So thank you for your work. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, do you have anything to add before we lose our line?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.